down there?
I'm doing it.
We're good? Thanks for coming. This is the Ask Us Anything. What is it called? We're all ears. Ask Us Anything. So we really just want to do an informal ask us all the questions you have. If you want to ask questions about the previous panels that happened in audio, ask those. If you want to ask questions about game audio, go for it. About life, where babies come from, anything is open to our answers. They may or may not be correct. So let's just introduce the panel here. Why don't you just introduce yourselves and we'll put outline.
Well, I'm Jacques Rousseau. I work for EA. I'm a speech artist primarily. I do the commentary system for Madden. Prior to that, I worked on FIFA doing commentary, and I've been in the industry for about 8 years now.
Cool, I'm Jesse James Allen. I'm the audio director on NBA Live right now for Electronic Arts. I've been with them for about 13 years.
I'm Hamilton Alstad. I used to be audio director for Disney Interactive and Knowledge Adventure and Idea Lab, and now I'm a freelancer, got my own recording studio, and I also teach audio production at Clemson.
Chris Rickwood, freelance composer, work on Smite, Paladins, Jetpack Fighter, Tripwires games, worked on their trailer, a lot of other stuff. Work's Supposed to Die, Madden 12. I can go on and on, but I won't. So.
I'm Mark Moreski. I'm the audio director at Tripwire. I was in Chicago and then came down here to Georgia a couple years ago, and been in the industry about 10 years.
Cool. So do we have questions? We'll just start with questions. Nick.
How do you all know each other? How do you all?
This guy.
Yeah. Chris is the epicenter of Atlanta audio.
Yeah.
So that's what you can aspire to.
Yeah, that's cool. We'll go.
What is the most awkward thing y'all have done in your field?
Were there cameras last night?
That's a good question.
That is a good question. Awkward how? From
You can
keep your
read that
jobs?
any way you want.
Oh wait, I got one. So, we were doing the MMA sessions. When we were doing the mixed martial arts game, we we were trying to figure out how to do the fight sounds, right? So just the punching sounds. And we thought, you could do it with Foley with a couple people or whatever. So we decided what we were going to do was buy a large roast, basically, big piece of meat, and beat your meat. So expressing like, I need a budget to, look, all right, so, yeah, that's the most awkward thing.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
There's a dual session. This is more just name dropping than anything.
Yeah.
Session with Troy Baker and Jennifer Hale, where they were both on mic at the same time. They went so far down the road of offensive that, it became a palpable, really weird. I have it, and I can't ever probably release it, but I do have it. It was pretty bad.
That's probably the awkward stuff is Smite's full of that stuff. The actors will just ad-lib lines. If there's Smite players here, the chocolate bunny skin is Chris Sabat just riffing on Barry White's inappropriate lines for a good half hour. It's not awkward for me, but man, if we actually put that stuff in the game, it would be awkward for everyone.
There's another good video session one. There's an actor who's fairly well known who apparently can't really read very well, I think, maybe is his problem. And that was a good one. His name rhymed with Mevin Morbo.
Really? Did you?
Oh my God, I have. Yeah, I can tell you. That's a long story. Yeah, but it was amazing.
Yeah, back here.
How do you get into the industry of music making for a person that wants to jump into that genre? Because a lot of artists that makes music or compose or produce music, they do techno, they do hip hop and all that good diversity part. But if they want to get into the gaming industry of making music, how do we go about doing that?
You two are kind of the composers here, right?
First of all, I would say that getting into, if you're in the music industry or the film industry or the TV industry, getting into the game industry is pretty much the same. It's you have your work, hopefully it's good, You try to find people that will like your work and pursue them, not in a, I want you to put my stuff in your game, but in a, hey, we should have some kind of relationship, usually a friendly relationship, before it becomes a working relationship. That's worked for me every single job I've ever had. But if you're in those other industries, it's really not different. It's like who you know, what your work is like, and meeting the right people. And that's only going to happen by being at these kind of events, doing great work, and just talking to people and being a cool guy.
That last part is the tricky part.
The cool guy.
I know it comes
gal.
natural for you, but for the rest
Yeah.
of us, nerds.
Yeah.
Kind of off that. So let's say like you get your university degree in, something related to audio, and you then really look to intern somewhere, like at a game studio, or is there a really applicable graduate program that's recommended? Or is that specifically not recommended so you don't waste your time?
It'd be interesting to see how this is answered.
I mean, I would say, it's kind of like the film and television industry where, as Chris was saying, like it's kind of who you know, and you got to meet people and kind of form a relationship before you'll get the opportunity to kind of show yourself. And it's very much like that, so it's not really kind of like anything accredited. It doesn't really seem to matter unless it helps you develop the skills that you can use, So it's kind of like that. Sometimes you have to be lucky, it's like that opportunity meets preparedness and stuff like that, and you just want to be able to shine when you get your chance to shine, and really just be a good person and meet people. That's the best way in. I've found.
Preparedness is big though. Like you're saying, accreditation and things like. It's good if you're gonna go learn the skills, but so many times the biggest thing for me, like I'm gonna hire someone in as a first year or junior to do stuff. If they come in and they're like, I know how to play guitar and I know how to run Pro Tools, that's not really a full package skill set. If you say, hey, I downloaded the Wise SDK and redid the sounds in Limbo because it comes with it for free, and check it out. Here's my project. Here's some videos of it. Then I'm going to take you a lot more seriously that, okay, this guy went and learned this engine. You can get UE4 free. Now, there's lots of ways to show I can get audio into a game in a real way.
But having said that, I hear the Clemson audio technology program is first rate, and the professor is really cool, as I understand it. But that's
And internships, I'm gonna always support that because we had a guy that works with us quite a bit at EA, came through the internship program. Technically amazing from day one, but what really sold us on him is he was just incredibly personable. He was awesome at communication, even with groups and disciplines that are uncommon for it. He'll go talk to a physics guy or a software engineer or whatever, and be able to follow up on information and just he would every day he'd come in, he'd just kind of make the rounds before he started his work, and we're like incredibly business savvy from that perspective. And those are skills that they don't even usually teach you that in the college classes. It's like the personable skills become so strong that you're like, yeah, he's an awesome sound designer, and he's incredibly easy to work with.
I would totally endorse it. I would always choose enthusiasm and attitude over skill set.
Absolutely.
You can learn
Absolutely.
anything,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
There's another thing that's good to do. I don't remember what now. It's a really good one.
Any more questions? That's it?
Oh no, the awkward guy.
Okay, so how do y'all feel about games being released early?
Sorry, really what?
How do y'all
Like
feel
before
about games
they're-
being released early?
Before you think that they're finished, or like
Before they-
beta
before they're
testing or?
Before they're ready?
I'm in my second early access game now, when that first started, I was like, oh, this is the worst thing ever. This is awful. I have to put out stuff that's not done. Usually we're like a milestone behind everybody else because when there's things going in, they have to be in before we can put sounds on them. So it's stressful and it was awful. But it turns out now I think early access is great because it keeps us on it. Like you don't get that build up of.
No, I guess I can say what that's kind of aiming towards. Battlefield 4. That game was released with a ton of bugs.
Yeah, audio bugs.
Not
A lot of-
really talking audio, but
There were
a lot of
I stepped through a room and fell off the map.
Yeah.
But did you hear it? That's a symptom of I think this generation of consoles and PCs. Like back, I know probably everybody here has made a game that was on a disc.
Yeah.
And yeah,
3.5 inch.
right. Like you couldn't, like especially like the Wii and the PS2 and stuff like that. There was no patch. That didn't. You got through cert, and that, I mean, you were done. There was no way to patch things, really.
Yep.
So that's a symptom of this. People are very willing to go like, well, day one patch it, don't worry, like it's fine. I mean, it's a real thing, and things aren't quite finished.
I wasn't very for it until I went through Destiny's pre-release. They actually, they were in, I guess, beta when they first let groups of people test it out. It was really cool because we actually got to talk to some of their designers and whatnot as we were playing through it, so they kind of explained things. And at first I was like, God, like the thought of, releasing a game like before it's even beta seemed kind of horrific, because I know how bad things can get sometimes. But they did it very elegantly, and like when you did find bugs or whatnot, I mean, it gave them time to course correct. So when I did play the game several months later and it had come out, I mean, first off, you could see the notable improvements in what they had done, but also you get the feeling that they also took away a lot of information of like, before you release it, how to course correct, especially after you've spent years developing a project. So there's good and bad. I guess it really just depends on how they are going to present that to the public, and are they willing to accept all the criticisms that they're going to hear and course correct accordingly.
Can I be a devil's advocate for a second here?
Yeah.
So that's totally true, and that's the way I always felt before, is that, when we release no wine before it's time, all that kind of thing. But I was walking down the hallway the other day, and I saw this great sign that some professor posted on the thing. I'm going to read you a segment of it, okay? And it's talking about perfectionism, because we're so caught up in this world with technology that things have to be perfect, and we've got peer pressure. Everyone wants to have it be perfect because they know that everyone else is looking at your stuff and saying, oh, it's got to be. And so there's a lot of pressure there. I understand that. But it says underneath that shiny veneer, perfectionism is nothing more than a deep existential angst. I know this is getting kind of spacey here. That says again and again, I'm not good enough. We must break this habit and at some point just release our finished work, okay, and release it as is, so that you can move on to your next work. And I understand that this is coming from a theater major, so go figure. But I really find that is that if you get to a point that the law of asymptotic approaching 80-20 rule, where 80% of your time is spent fixing 20% of the problems, right? And so at some point you've got to stick a fork in it and say it's done and get it out there. And until you do that, you can't move on to the next thing. So I'm suggesting the fact that no question you want to smooth off all the rough edges, but at some point you just got to say it's never going to be perfect. And by the way, I hate to shock you guys, but we as humans are not perfect either, okay? We're flawed, except for Chris, but the rest of us have flaws. And so we actually perceive the world that way. To have everything perfect, it's like using a MIDI drummer, right? Why doesn't that sound good? Because it's perfect, right? Yeah, exactly. It doesn't sound human. So we view a world that is filled with its flaws, and so that has to be part of the experience we're putting out there as well. And if it's too perfect, you actually disconnect the user from the emotional context, and that's really what it's about, right? Is the emotional connection. So, anyways,
the endless options, so you can get buried in it,
exactly,
especially in audio.
And then it'll never be released. And then look, too old for you guys, but the Boston second album, remember this? It was 8 years from album 1 to album 2, and the second album sounded like this first album. And the reason was because Tom Schultz kept saying, no, I hear some noise in there. I'm going to re-record everything again. And by the time they get their second album, they had missed the wave. They were yesterday's news, right? So at some point, you just got to say.
Well, there's the phrase, you don't ever finish games, you either run out of time or give up. It's true. We've all shipped things that we know probably were broken.
Well, yeah, have you ever done a project, finished a project and said, that's as good as it can be?
Nailed it.
It can't be better. Never.
Yeah.
When it comes to the audio design, is it hard for you to transition from one program to a different one? Because you've been mastering one, like say for instance, you named Pro Tools, but then all of a sudden another company that you probably contract with, it was like, oh, we need you to use Fruity Loops or something different like that, and we want you to master this, to use it for this. Is there like any issues when it comes to audio transitioning from different software programs to utilizing game design?
I don't have a problem with it. I almost have to do it. I'm very short attention span. So I like to use different DAWs. I'm actually using Ableton Live now to do sound design, which it's not really meant to do, but
How do you do that?
it's a I'll show you, dude. It'll blow your mind. Yeah.
Upside down.
So I actually like switching tools. I like switching from sound design to implementation to composition, just like within like hours of each other, just because it's, I think there's something about being a creative where you always just want to be doing something new and something different. And using new tools kind of helps you get out of those habits that you have. Like, oh, I always create whooshes using like the whoosh library, or I always create my creature sounds using dehumanizer, or like pitching them down using like a granulator. You know, when you think about like, oh, instead of using that tool for doing like creature voices, use Ableton Live, and I'm going to use Max MSP and see what happens there. And that to me is why the job is fun, is discover that new stuff.
There's a whoosh library?
Whoosh makers,
To follow up, none of us. Well, I don't know if you guys changed. You've been at EA for you said 13 years.
Yeah.
Has the engine stayed pretty consistent?
Not at all.
Yeah. So I would say like I feel like every year basically I'm in a new game engine. So you pretty much have to just be able to wipe your brain clean. I mean, there were times when I was in Chicago. I was working on 3 different. It was a licensed title kind of company. I had 3 different game engines at once. Like I was doing. So that's enough change for me. So I'm really weird about Pro Tools. I use SoundForge and Pro Tools, like because I can do it with my eyes closed. So
I will say, like, switching between game engines is completely different. I hate that.
See, I love that.
Like, having to go, well, it depends. So if you're going from like Unreal 3 to Unreal 2, my life sucks. So, or going from like Unreal 3 to Unity, I hate that.
So that's the way I feel about Cubase. It makes me want to just hit things.
Should use Ableton.
You can tell that was made by engineers, right?
Yeah, I
Not
say
musicians.
on that topic, especially on the runtime side of things, when people ask me, what should I learn on or whatever, and they'll name off X amount of programs, and I'm like, yes.
Yeah,
Because really, what you're trying to learn is the methodology of how to work in that environment. And if you learn that, I can throw any program ever at you and you're gonna go, okay, I kind of get the gist of this, and I can move on from that. And especially when you're talking about runtime engines and stuff, I mean, I've been on so many projects. They're all totally different. Everything from old consoles to small consoles to all that stuff. And it's like, if you understand the methodologies of how to make sound interactive, then you're kind of bulletproof against any change.
It's just the shortcuts that kill you. I mean,
Yeah.
every day. Like, no.
Absolutely. But you know the goal. Like, you always
Yeah, I
have the
know.
goal in mind, yeah. Yeah.
I think the downside to the Switch is just the learning period of trying to figure out where all the buttons are hidden and
That's-
if you
those darn
can't do the
hotkeys,
things.
man.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so how exactly, if a director or a manager or a company or someone was to request your work, like how does an interaction usually go? Like how do they present the project to you?
For like freelance.
Either for freelance or for anything that you're doing for like either composing something, how exactly do they lay out themes and stuff like that for you to
That's a whole talk in itself. I mean, there's so many different ways. Sometimes it's
They do it wrong.
I was gonna say, they use words that have nothing to do with what we talk about. Yeah, blue and
totally, yeah.
Can you make it more orange?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah. Spreadsheets, they'll usually have design docs. I mean, I did a trailer once where it was all spreadsheet. Like they had like the timing down. It's like the ogre enters here, the elves come over the hill at 18 seconds, and then I had to score music to that. So I could go from that to like, how I really like to work is they give me the build of the game, and then I just go in and do my stuff, and then I hand the game back to them.
That would be a perfect world, wouldn't it?
It is a perfect world until somebody takes your job, and then now I have to like hand it to him, and then he rejects it.
this is a very passive aggressive conversation.
Then I have to redo it, which I never have to redo it when I'm putting it in the game.
Yeah, when you're in charge of it, you get to decide that it's done.
So I mean, it varies so much. Like it'll go from spreadsheets to full game.
But there are people who can't work. Like I work with some really talented sound designers who if I said, you know, here's the engine and go, it would just wouldn't happen. But I can give them videos and they'll give me back great stuff. And then
Yeah.
other guys who, are just like, please let me just get this in.
This has to deal with like sound design, especially in 3D space. And there being multiple cameras, there being multiple audio sources, there being multiple microphones, virtual microphones throughout the space. What do you have to? Do you have patterns? How do you deal with the fact that you might be looking very close to an explosion or to a scream, and moments later the camera be switched to further away, and not to have this gigantic jarring effect? Like, do you have patterns, or what do you do?
On that case, essentially what you're trying to do is, if you know that there's going to be frequent cutscenes, you create what is like a slew curve on the volume line. So if it goes from camera 1 to camera 2, it's not like sound goes from 15 to 150. It will ramp up over a course of amount of milliseconds or whatnot. So that helps smooth those like really jarring transitions, and that's true on any of those cutscenes. Because in general, when you're doing those kinds of things, you're putting in a virtual mic. And that's another whole conversation in itself, because the virtual mic is attached to the camera object, but sometimes it's not really representing what the camera's focal point is. So you'll have other situations where like the camera is zoomed crazy into like whatever subject it is, but then they'll talk or whatever and it sounds incredibly distant, right? And you're like, that's not, it doesn't look like it should sound, basically. So then you'll have to, sit and talk with your camera guys, like what are your intentions for these scenes, to kind of prepare for those kinds of situations. As far as surround sound goes, there's two models of going about it. The first model is if you have either like a stereo or a mono source, it's attached to an emitter or attached to an object, and that object will circle around in 3D space. It's tracked by the decoder essentially on the game console. The other model is you've actually recorded something in surround sound. So like on NBA, we record our crowds in 7.1, and they're massive because we're actually recording those in stadiums. So essentially, we'll just set up, here's the polarity of how everything's laid out, right? So we know that, left side of the stadium, right side of the stadium is matching up with left side of the recording, right side of the recording. And as the cameras pan around, again, you have a little bit of a lag on the audio side, so it doesn't pan as fast as it visually pans. That way it kind of sounds a little bit more normal to human ears. But then you'll get your positioning right, so the camera will arrive and then you'll hear the crowd kind of like arrive in its proper position, and you'll notice that there's some movement through space. It gets tricky, and especially when you're talking about like stuff that's in like binaural headphones and whatnot, you can pick up on that really, really fast. We're so used to like hearing sounds and knowing, where the positions of things are, that, faking it has always been very, very hard for audio. So
Cut scenes are, if you know you've got a locked cut scene, you've got a lot of leeway then, because then you can actually mix it, instead of using the game audio positioning, you can actually mix it properly and it will play back the same way every time when you know how the cut scene's going to be, and then they change it. It's always the balance of like how much you want to let the end do.
yeah, rule of thumb in general though is like sound will travel at a slower rate than the visuals. So, always gradually come into things, don't always, bam, instant sound. It's just too abrasive.
Do you stay away from like certain tones or certain types of sounds that don't work well in like 3D space?
Stuff that's got real high frequencies, you got to be real careful about, especially if even if it's just like dialogue and there's somebody that's talking in a range that's like way too sibilant or whatever. It's grating over a period of time. And when you're thinking of games, you're always got to think of like the 40-hour rule, that these people are going to be playing this thing for a minimum of 40 hours. You don't want 2 hours into it, like, I got to turn off the commentary, I got to turn off the music, I got to turn off something here that I find annoying. So that's, the big rule of thumb is listening to stuff aesthetically is a grating on me over a period of time.
Yes.
So.
Do you have to go and hunt for those sounds that you're looking for that you can't find in the studio or in your own cubicle, or do you have to go out on the website and buy sound that you're looking for? And if you do, where do you go to get those type of sound effects and stuff?
Yeah, all of those things.
Yes.
The way the sausage is made, like, you wouldn't believe probably the sounds that make up the sounds that you hear that you think they are, I would say. I don't know how to explain. Libraries, recording things, calling people, desperation.
Yeah. Watching sound designers work, and I don't know, sometimes how people connect the sound of one thing with what you're seeing in a completely nothing alike, and you're, you know, I don't know, this crazy connections like that sometimes, you know.
There's a great Simpsons Foley, like it's on YouTube I think somewhere, where they show them doing Foley to the Simpsons, and they show it without it, and they kind of bring in the video, and when you see what they're doing, it makes absolutely no sense, and then as soon as you see it, it makes sense. That doesn't answer your question, but like sound libraries, recording, yeah, it just kind of, whatever it is that you can do that makes the thing sound the way it looks. I don't know how to explain that. Yeah.
Oh, and the other question was, what website do y'all go to go buy the sounds, the effects that you use for your production and stuff like that? Just if y'all can.
All of them?
Yeah.
Seriously,
Hollywood
anything,
Edge,
which
Sound
ones are-
Ideas, yeah.
The Recordist. Just,
Yeah,
it's
Recordist.
a ton of them.
The problem is we all
Armstrong.
know all of those libraries, so you can call it like.
Yeah, disc 6040.
Yeah.
Do you guys rip on each other when you catch it? Like, oh, you didn't
I
do
hate
that.
that.
Dude, you're not even trying.
Yeah, come on.
I think one of the
Not the
first.
Wilhelm scream again.
First things I got Chris was like, dude, is that like SFX kit really? I'm like, it's temp. I just throw it in. I throw in bad sounds so they don't get attached.
Tommy Tallarico.
How long did it take you from deciding you wanted to be a composer or a sound designer to actually being able to live off just being that?
Wow,
That's a good question. Let's go down the line. Instant.
I started working at EA full time, so I mean, I'm kind of exempt from all that. I'm like the unicorn of the industry now.
yeah, I spent probably a good 2.5 years as interns in studios, trying to get some skills. Probably another year and a half as a like second engineer, then kind of worked my way up. I think probably by the time I sat down at EA and as a full-on sound designer, it was probably closer to 6 years or 7 years. And that's like laser focus. I knew I was going to get in and be a sound designer, but it was a very unusual path because I didn't set out to say I'm going to work in video games, because it wasn't really a job at that point in my life. And later on, it became kind of like something that was available to an audio engineer.
Took about 2 years, I think, because I went out to Hollywood to seek my fortune, and I was like, I know this is not going to work out, but that's okay. I've got 2 years worth of living expenses saved up, and when it runs out, I'm going to go back and get my old job. I was an engineer at Texas Instruments, and like literally I had a month worth of expenses left, and I said, this is it. Oh well, it was a good run. And then I got hired by Knowledge Adventure as their audio director, but if it hadn't been for that one little thing, I would have been, well, I wouldn't be here.
I got a master's degree in music composition, so that's 6 years. And then for 2 years, I tried to get a job. Got my first credits in '99 on Evil Dead. And then it probably from there took another probably 3 years to be making enough to not have to work at another job. So a lot. And I was freelance the whole time. I've never worked in-house.
I had a recording studio. I was an engineer, and then I started my own recording studio, which is the best way to lose all the money you have. It was really awesome. It was really nice, and we did some cool stuff. But I learned a lot, and I was really kind of at the end of my rope with it. I'd kind of just got married, and I was very, very, very poor. And I was making like really bad like post-production garage door commercials and stuff, and it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And a friend of mine, I was recording his band, and he's like, "Hey, we're looking for an audio engineer to work on game audio display," because he worked at a game company. And do you know anybody? And I was like, I didn't even realize that was a job. Like, why didn't I think of that? Like, yeah, totally. I could probably figure that out. And that was it. It was totally on accident.
Yeah.
What were some of the interesting ways you've made any sort of sounds? Any funny ways that you made a sound that you wouldn't really expect?
All right, I'm going to reiterate the story I told Mr. Awkward guy here. Remember the story? So we were recording sounds for Steven Spielberg's Movie Maker, and there's this. It's a bunch of movie clips, and you're the director, and you make these virtual movies and stuff. And so we had to have all these different sounds, and one of the sounds is a jail scene. And so we went to this abandoned jail in LA, and while Mr. Spielberg and the crew went for lunch, we thought we'd record a bunch of the jail door slammings. And so we're like, so I'm in the jail cell. Wham, wham, and it sounded really cool. Wham, wham, wham. And it locked. And me and all the equipment, all the other, because the crew had stuffed their equipment in there too, we were locked up. And so we had to call like the guy who let us in there. That was afterwards. Bad scene there for a minute.
Did you panic?
I was only worried that if we couldn't get out before Mr. Spielberg and all the guys came back, and then I'd be in real trouble. Luckily, we got out before they got back. Otherwise, it would have been really bad because they would production would have stopped right there.
You're more afraid of Spielberg than
oh yeah, all my life, yeah, sure.
We hit a dumpster with a car and recorded it once.
Accidentally?
No, totally on purpose. It was late.
Oh, I'd like to do, like, I like to put my voice in everything. Like, just
Cameo.
because it's an ego thing. Like, I can say, listen to something and I'm like, yeah, that's me. Like, the biggest one was, like, I did the ESPN Monday Night Football theme. In 2006, we did all these new arrangements, and, like, mine was kind of this hip-hoppy metal, new metal kind of not good arrangement, but they accepted it. But on that, like, every now and then you hear this guy going like, "Give it up," and it's like me. So I can like watch it, like, I'll be in a bar and like, all right, listen.
Quick,
That's
PPR!
So how small this industry is, I did a bunch of additional engineering on the Monday Night Football theme in what year? I don't even know what it was. When Little Stevie or whoever, what's the guy's name from Bruce Springsteen's band? Did the theme that year.
Yeah.
So see, it's always like, there's like 10 of us in this industry.
One of the weirdest ones I did was I was working on one of the Maddens, and they had this whole thing, like they wanted organic UI sounds, which I never quite got. Like, I didn't understand really what that meant, and I'd try to get it out of them. And they're like, just not click and beep and that kind of, just organic, just organic. So I got really frustrated, and what wound up happening was we had one of our, he was a designer or production person reading some temp files for the game, and I was playing through the files, but the little markers on soundboards like locked around about a couple milliseconds of this, and it played some of the weird sounds that people make when they're like recording. I'm like, that's pretty weird. So I extracted all the sounds out, and I built the whole UI menu system out of this person's voice, right? And it was funny because the rest of the team was like, yeah, that's really different. I like that. I like the way you're going. And then one producer was like, why does that sound weird? I don't understand it. Like, they were hearing their voice, but they couldn't understand it. And it was going out like that. I mean, it was a really unique set of sounds, but that's where it came from.
Yeah, I remember a couple guys working on an NHL arcade game. It was like a 3-on-3 NHL game, and that's actually how they did all their UI sounds, where they just grabbed the mic and was like, chicka, 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 chicka. It sounded really cool though, Yeah. It was really awesome.
Who needs a library?
That, by the way, like a good way to get like whoever's approving your sounds to approve sounds is to use them in the sound. Okay. So like I did a whole movie soundtrack where the director basically sang the soundtrack. What do you want? He wanted those Penderecki type stuff. So he just like, so I just took that and like processed it, threw it back in the film, and it's like, man, this is amazing. This is it's like, oh, even better, yeah.
That's actually a really good point of the tendency to overthink things. Working on a Magic game, and it was like, I just want the fireballs when I want them to sound like you're firing off a shotgun. And I beat my head into the wall trying to make a fireball sound that sounded like really beefy and like a shotgun. And then one day I totally gave up, and I just put a shotgun underneath it, and he was like, oh my god, that's perfect. So don't overthink things.
Yeah. Right?
So in your first year or 2 years, either working at an internship or at your first job, where I guess your skill set might not have been like what it is now. What were the key things that you learned in that period of time?
If you break the build, you have to bring donuts in the next day. That's what.
That don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to not know. It's actually better to come forward to, you know, I mean, there was a lot of crying my first year in the industry. So, but no, it was really, you know, I'd make calls to our tech group or anybody really that I was just struggling with. Instead of just kind of sitting there quietly and burning away time and getting even more frustrated, it's better to just let it out. Like, I'm not following how that's supposed to go or how that's supposed to work, because usually what would follow is some little enlightenment piece of like, oh, all you really have to do is this, or all we're trying to avoid is this, or whatever, and then you're through it, you know, and then you've learned a little something and you move on. So you have to be, you know, even if you're like a veteran sound designer and you're into some new thing, like maybe you're coming out of post-production audio and you're going into games or whatever, you have a lot of skill, but not a lot of skill in that area. You know, don't be afraid to start over again. Don't be afraid to be the new guy and, you know, go like, you know, I have a plethora of information that is behind this little barrier I've got, and once you're through that, you'll grow professionally quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, a really good way to get everyone to hate you and not have a job in your first year is to just decide you're like, oh, I just know what I'm doing, and just do it without asking the question. I mean, that's a real, yeah, go ask, because everybody's generally nice, and it's way better than breaking things. And we still do it. I mean, like, I just took over a project, took a new job and started working on a project that Chris has been working on for a long time. And how many times have I emailed you like, dude, what? I don't even understand how this works. And you're like, oh, yeah. Move. Yeah. And we still do it, you know, so.
I would say as a freelancer, for the first 2 years you're trying to break into the industry, just keep in mind it's not a race. You're gonna see people like excel faster than you, you're gonna see people excel slower than you, and it's gonna feel really lonely, like, why am I not breaking out? Like, I've got the talent, why can't I score Mass Effect? You know, why not me? And it's really, really tough to not let your ego go there. I just remind myself that John Williams didn't meet Spielberg until he was 40. So that's, you know, I'm only 42, so I'm like pretty much John Williams right now.
That's what you think. Exactly.
Writing that
Do you guys know any producers who came straight from the music business into gaming? And if you do, what were some of their struggles succeeding in the gaming industry?
Producers or music production kind of composition and things, you mean?
Yeah, like producing songs like mainstream artists, things of that nature.
The only way I know that really is happening is when it's kind of a game where, like, there's been some things where, like, I don't know, someone mildly, you know, involved in the music industry kind of does a game as a thing.
Yeah, the Trevor Rabin kind of thing. I'm just gonna be there. Guess the parent.
It's usually a struggle. Like, I worked with a composer who did a lot of really cool TV show stuff. Person knows what I'm talking about right now. And he really struggled coming over to games to really figure out how that all worked. And he was like an Emmy-winning, amazing composer, and he really had a hard time with it. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's different. It's very different.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the skill sets, you know, you wouldn't naturally be a producer and just sit down and be like, I'm implementing stuff in, you know, whatever game now. Because, I mean, your tools and concepts and all that stuff, I mean, I'm sure from the creative side there's a lot of stuff that's shared about, you know, the aesthetics of the game, but in terms of, yeah, what you do on a day-to-day and stuff, I mean, you'd have a lot to learn.
Yeah, so. It's like, why do actresses always think that, well, I'm a great actress, therefore I can be a singer, right? That's terrible. What do you think?
We have an interesting case with that, though. We have a guy that he's a music producer that has helped us out on Madden several times. And what's interesting is that it's not really his music abilities or producing abilities that he brings to the table, but he has a really amazing ear and for mastering and whatnot, for mastering quality, just tonal quality of things. And he's so used to dealing with it in music, like all frequencies need to sit in the right, you know, places, and you know, you have to have the voice here, you have to have the crowd here, or whatever. And he took on a lot of our speech mastering, and he took it to a level that we couldn't even comprehend, right? Because it's just like that's what he does. He knows how to make a dialogue line or voices sit incredibly well in a bed of sound. And so that's taking expertise from a field that he's really great in and applying it in a completely different context.
Adapt.
And he does really good at that.
Thank you.
So as a contract composer, when you're starting out, when do you decide that you're good enough to stop doing free things?
Free things.
Instantly.
Yeah, I was saying.
When do you?
You can say you
Well,
don't
I
have
guess-
a lot of money, but you can't say you don't have any. Never do anything for free, ever, ever, ever. Golden rule, don't.
But I
Don't
guess
do
how
it.
do you weigh, like, is this worth me doing, like, even a little bit of something for someone, just, or is it even worth it?
Can I just jump in? You don't have to get paid for financially. There are bartering options. There are some cards you'll probably see, Sarah, on these big rack cards that I pass out wherever I go here. That was made by a guy who's a graphic designer, and we just bartered. He needed a radio spot, and I needed a rack card, so we traded. So being not doing free just means you're not getting anything back. It just doesn't have to be a financial arrangement.
As far as what's worth it, I think for smaller stuff when you're doing, and mine comes from music. Game-wise, I've always worked for a company, but from the music end of things, it was always about: is this going to? What am I going to get something in return that makes sense to me? But if I knew that wasn't the case, is this going to make me better at this? Is this something I care enough about to push me to get better at it? Or is it going to introduce me to kind of people or make a relationship that's going to better my career? That's really always how I looked at it.
Yeah. Awkward guy.
Okay, so my next question is, going back to sounds, what is the hardest sound y'all ever had to come up with? Like, y'all absolutely could not think of anything to mimic a sound, come up with a sound, come up with a song, anything along those lines.
This wasn't really that hard, but it was a weird direction. One of them was, we need the sound of the blood flowing through a pregnant woman's womb.
Well then.
That was.
Did you mic it?
We had to. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, for Disney's Magic Artist, which is like a Photoshop for kids. We had to make the sound of a pencil, and I didn't think, you record a pencil, right? Well, you guys ever tried to close mic with pencil or thing? It sounds like. It sounds like an earthquake, and it was like, that is not what a pencil sounds like. So we actually had to come up with a lot. Try every device in the world, and it ends up just being like a popsicle stick on sandpaper or something. But a lot of times, what you see as the visual and what you end up actually recording are completely opposites.
I can't think of anything that was that odd. I'm still
We're
trying
super
to.
pro.
How did you solve
Just
that
walking
problem?
It's a sordid tale. You don't want to.
It's just goo, man.
My peeves, footsteps for me are a peeve. Like there's so many games that have really awkward bad footsteps. I get really weird about it, and I usually just hate them. But footsteps can make you crazy.
Yeah.
Like, and if you want to get into like, I'm gonna turn, I'm gonna slow down, how things. Yeah, footsteps can be a real pain in the butt.
Thinking about Resident Evil, aren't you?
There's a lot of games. Alien. Well, we're on YouTube. Alien Isolation. I actually had to quit playing that game because of the footsteps. Like, I just couldn't handle it. I couldn't do it. The timing, there's something.
Yeah, when they're not in sync, or that's the wrong surface.
Yeah, it sounds
You're
like
not wearing soft-soled shoes. What are you
So
looking?
that's CD things, but yeah.
That and door slams. The rack on door slam here.
No, so that's not. Everyone's got.
Yeah,
their thing.
VW slams and it sounds like a Cadillac. Man, come on.
Yeah.
Before getting into like music composition or music production, like by chance, did any of you ever play instruments or? Oh, okay.
I was in band.
You were in band? What? Sorry.
I
What?
played trumpet.
Trumpet?
Yeah.
That's a good instrument.
That's
a real player.
So trumpet, piano.
Yeah, I wanted to play trumpet.
Yeah, I play
Piano?
guitar after that.
I'm a guitarist. I actually went to school for guitars.
And then you?
Guitar.
Okay, cool.
I quit playing trumpet.
That's why we can't ever get into gigs.
Aw.
Yeah, I should be playing wind instruments.
Yeah, Nick.
Now with games, you have to downgrade sometimes to like 22, 1.05, which really kills your, I guess, quality. It gives us a lot of the air and all that. I mean, how do you guys try and use harmonic exciders or anything like that, or you just convert it, just forget about it in the game?
Well, Gen 4 consoles is a little less than
It's a
before,
little less.
so.
But this is one of my favorite topics. So for the old, like, back in the Wii days, like, so seriously, like on Wii, it was crazy, right?
Yeah.
This is, if you've been to any panel I've done the last few years, you've heard me complain about 3.5 megs on the Wii stack memory. We sat there with, like, there's auto resamplers that this guy tried to make, one of the devs there, and it didn't really work. But I would sit there with a just a shelf on it and figure out, okay, I can live without anything above this, and then figure out what sampler rate to use, and know, like footsteps. Okay, mud I can get away with. I need a little of this, but carpet I can get lower, and I got crazy listening. But yeah, in this gen, like, there's nothing less than 44. Like we've got so much room now that it's not really a thing anymore.
Yeah. So you guys are spoiled, man.
Yeah.
I started. Dinosaur 3 Adventure 3D was 8-bit, 8 kilohertz. So don't give me this stuff. You guys have it good, you know.
I did DS.
I did DS.
I did 3DS. So.
Oh yeah, did you do TRS-80? That was the one.
Parsec. No, that's a TS 99. Never mind. Yeah, that's not really so much of a thing. Music quality, streaming, but see even that now. No, it's not really a thing anymore.
Yeah, I mean, maybe more the kind of compression and stuff you use still, you know, it's the XMAs and MP3.
And you get into that where like certain consoles, like PS4, you really want to use that track because it does hardware decompression, and the Xbox you want to use. I mean, there's differences there. But.
Yeah, I mean, in sports games, we deal with like a wealth. It's like disk space is kind of what hits us, or download size, because we just have so many assets that can take up gigs. And so it's like you need those to be smaller. It can't be gigs.
It's the disk space thing, not memory anymore. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the early interactive or whatever on Xbox One and PS4 now, because you got to have
the demo version.
Yeah, when you install the game, it does a really quick install, and then it installs the rest of the game while you play a little bit. And I don't know, it might depend on the game and how challenging that is, but I mean, I know for us trying to put gigs of commentary, and then it's like, you can't use all of that, and it's like you gotta whittle it down and sometimes crush it a little bit with some
making sure you're not putting it in 4 spots. And,
So you guys mentioned like the high sample rate. I guess that's for consoles. Is there a different standard for mobile, or?
Never made a mobile game.
There's no standard for mobile.
It's like
make it fit. That's
exactly.
the
Okay.
Well, if it's
Probably a
streaming,
lot
that's
of
also
standards.
8 kilohertz if it's streaming it.
Yeah.
Because that's all your, I mean, if you put it higher, it's gonna have to downsample because it can't support anything higher.
Oh, internal speakers on controllers are the thing that they're terrible, and you have to just figure out because everybody wants it to make some noise, and it's better now, I think, isn't it? The Wiimote had like roughly this much frequency response that you could actually discern out of it.
when it's not playing back all choppy.
Right.
Yeah. The PS4 seems to be a little better at that.
I got a good question. What is your favorite way to listen to audio? I'll give you a prime example. One of my friends, he's an audio designer, and when he makes his music or sound effects or anything, he like to listen to it in his car with his subwoofers, 12-inch, amp and everything, the whole 9 yards. Some people like to use Boy speakers because they got the home theater system and have that surround sound effect. What is your favorite way how you guys listen to your audio design that you do?
Well, it's a little different because we're trying to make it sound good on all systems. So when I'm like designing music or audio, it's in my studio, which is as flat as I can get it. So it's not necessarily going to sound great in there, but it'll sound good on everything else because I'm hearing exactly what's in the file. And then I listen on, I have little R tones that kind of boost the mid frequency. It takes all the coolness out of the sound. So you don't get any lows, you don't get any highs, you just got all this mid. And if you make that sound really great, once you add the top end and the bottom end back in, it's like, oh, this is amazing. Check, please.
Overtones of Antones now I think is the new company that makes them, but yeah, they're amazing. And everyone will make fun of you, like, you paid $800 for bad speakers? Yeah, but they're really specifically bad. But I mean, I have my go-tos, like there's monitors that I just always use that I love, and then I have a pair of headphones that are not the greatest headphones in the world, but I know them inside and out, and you just know how they're going to translate from those things. But.
Yeah, we commonly do television tests just to see what it sounds like in the various television speakers. Of course, we have a very flat, Genelec system that we listen to. Headphones, and as of late, we've actually been diving quite a bit into those Sony Gold headphones because a lot of gamers play on those. It's a good standard to kind of say this is how people are going to experience it.
Also, as a freelancer, if you know what the people who are approving the sounds are using, you should get that system too. And that happened with Tripwire. I would, like John was listening to this stuff, and he was using those Logitech 5600s or whatever surround sounds, and we'd always go back and forth like, this sounds terrible. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, there's distortion in this. So I finally bought a pair where it's a whole system and said, all right, let me hear what you're hearing so I could design for you. And then after that stuff started getting approved quicker because now I knew how he was hearing the sound.
Does the budget, overall budget for audio vary with the style of game? Or if it doesn't vary too much, then generally what percentage of the budget goes to audio in any type of game? What's the ideal versus the reality, I guess? Would be a good question too. 3 questions.
I don't. There's like it really depends on the genre of game that you're making, and kind of like, are you doing a lot of external recordings or whatnot? It's like some of the race games that we used to make are very complicated because you had to go get you had to go rent a racetrack, you had to go hire a professional driver, you had to get all the liability and everything covered if anything goes wrong. You got the those things like just blow up in budget. Versus other stuff that's like, well, we're just following some stuff, or we're able to get easy access into a broadcast truck or something like that. So you really have to scope it by what is it that you are going after.
I usually have to come up with a rough budget. I have to come up with a rough budget usually at the beginning of a project, like this, especially after the first couple. Like maybe we don't know how much this is going to cost till we get one of them done. Things also change based on like. Your VO budget might be this, and then the owner realizes that you can hire an actor that they really like, and then your VO budget is this now. Like that, I mean, that stuff happens too, so all of those things.
I think, sometimes you gotta kind of sell your feature, like,
It's worth it.
I mean, if you were to think of like the game GTA, then being like, check out this badass radio system we have. We need a lot of music. I mean, they have to convince people to spend like hundreds of thousands just licensing an insane amount of music. So
People don't realize how much licensed, like, popular music costs, like, it's insane.
Well, excluding Guitar Hero and games where obviously you're licensing pre-existing works, I mean, that's just exorbitant. But like, generally speaking, what's the ratio of money allocated for audio versus the rest of the game?
depends on the priority, I think, of the
You guys must live like in a great world, because every one of my projects always said, you give them the big pitch, they say, this is why I need this money, they say, that sounds great, okay, really believe you, now here you get 1%. Every time, it's always like the last little thing there, so I'm
2%. Yeah.
I've never seen it go.
You fight and beg and borrow.
And even with Disney, which you think would be like, no, they're like, I don't know.
But it's honest, because VO and music usually, especially VO, eats up so much of your budget. If you have any kind of a VO heavy game at all, I mean, by the time you pay, union rates and studios, and that eats up your budget really quickly.
Are you talking about like American Federation of Musicians Union?
Well, SAG-AFTRA is the voice acting stuff,
yeah,
but
okay,
it's
them too.
expensive, yeah.
They're a bunch of jerks.
He said it, not us.
It's on tape too.
So like companies like EA, they do a lot of licensing and whatnot. But as far as the incidental music or the scored music from the composers that they work with, is that ever licensed as well, or is that still like kind of like an outright, we're going to own that?
If you can get away with it, you can license your music. I try to, every game I work on, to license it, but mostly get turned down.
That's just negotiation process.
Yeah, but the other thing is because the companies want work for hire, so they want to own the IP and like use it everywhere. But you can negotiate other things outside of that. So you get ancillary rights to soundtracks. If they license it in a trailer or use it outside of the SKU, then you can get cuts of that. So there's more than just the music you're doing for the game, like that deal that we made. There's other deals that you can make around that where you can get bonuses and royalties.
And we're on the opposite side of that discussion
Yeah,
always,
sorry.
because it's like, I'm the guy who's like, no way, man, because I don't know if I'm gonna use this as a phone ringer or on 10 years from now and something else, like, no way, I'm gonna buy it outright, what's that number? So,
Well, I always thought it was interesting because with all of so much music that's licensed, you would think that they'd be comfortable with the concept of licensing something, right? But then for the actual underscore, so no, we need to own it.
and some companies are better about it than others.
Because like they think of it like we are paying you to make music for us. Like we are the owners of that. We're you're just the maker. You're the widget maker. We have all the ideas of what that music is supposed to be. So that's our idea. So we own that. That's kind of where it comes from.
But let me ask you, but internally, your stuff is not licensing, right? If you
That's
do,
how you think.
I mean, yours is
My
becomes.
idea.
Yeah, your property of whatever
Right, I
you
just
create
understand.
is part of the company. Yeah.
You say, well, you got a good gig there if you're.
It's interesting, we talk about SAG-AFTRA.
That would
The
be
voice
awesome.
actors are trying to negotiate royalties, especially for like large parts in games. That's right now happening. That's gonna be interesting to see how that shakes out.
I know.
And because Troy Baker does 98% of all games that are made right now. I think he's single-handedly doing this.
All right, we have probably 2 more questions, so we'll do Nick and then awkward guy, and that'll be it. Let's go ahead, Nick.
You're talking about, you make your own modules and stuff, React and all that. Does EA own stuff like that, so you can't sell that plugin?
Correct.
Is that why you're telling us how to make
I explained the methodology of it. I mean, it would be a little bit different if it was like a standalone C+ kind of thing that existed that, is like proprietary. I'm building in an open framework with common modules and tools, so.
Could they turn around and sell it if you made a module?
If I created some kind of like standalone VST plugin or something that used something that I had built for a game, yeah, that would be their property, yes.
It's mostly like problem-solving techniques, and we all share pretty openly because it's not a competition. It's not like, oh man, that guy knows how to make a footstep sound that nobody else knows how to do. Like we all just have the same problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except Chris, you won't tell us how he does it.
What do y'all think is the best games console?
Uh-oh. Stop.
Shots fired.
Yeah, we're in a situation we just have to say yes.
Any questions?
Yeah, we got one. We can do one more. One last.
I guess this is kind of a good ending question. Where do you see the industry going? Where do you see like audio jobs within the industry going in the future?
I would say it definitely is, there's a lot of contracting in the future, for sure. Mostly if you just look at the scale of games right now. I mean, it used to be, here's the scenario or here's the amount of levels that we're doing versus, look at some of these games. Look at how in-depth a game like Grand Theft Auto 5 is, like all of those locations and maps and dialogue and we look at games like the Knights of the Old Republic on the PC. It's 155,000 lines or something like that of dialogue, and it's like, where do you get the staff to cut that up and make that happen in an X amount of time? It's gonna get massive, and I think there's gonna be a major need for the ability for sound artists to not only say, well, here's your sounds or your files or everything, but they're going to be providing, turnkey, here's all your integration done in a modular form that you can plug in, because the scope of games that's only going up, and the amount of time we have to make them is not. So.
And studios are finally starting to stop doing the huge ramp up like that. That's been a thing we've all been through, layoffs. That's part of this industry. Where they ramp up really big because they've got this crazy project, and then there's always that crossover, something gets canceled and then people get laid off. So I know a lot of people who've been like sound designers at companies, artist companies, who are moving into freelance very successfully by doing that. Like I can, like Chris or Andrew Lackey or those guys, I can say, hey, can you do this set? And they can get the repository, put it in, and check it into the, and it's done. I don't have to think about it. So that's a huge market, I think.
Even though they got the option where you could cut the sound off and just use your own custom, play on most of these consoles nowadays, because they got that feature now.
Well, music, yeah. If you're playing Call of Duty, you still need to hear footsteps or you're gonna die. So footsteps.
All right, guys, that's our time, but thank you very much for sitting through this and